Delhi, May the 11th, 1857. The rebellion has just taken the city. You saw that part. But upstairs in the telegraph office, the company's entire future has come down to 2 teenage signalers and 1 thin telegraph wire.
They're inside the walls. The bungalows are burning. We run now.
One last message.
And so, with the rebellion coming up the stairs, 2 teenagers named Brendish and Pilkington tapped out a warning to the Punjab. Sepoys risen, city falling. Goodbye. And then, I want to be clear about the history here, absolutely legged it. That message beat every galloping rebel messenger by days. Garrisons across the northwest were quietly disarmed before trouble could ever reach them. Remember the company's 4 cards? That was card 4, playing itself on day 1. The shop was down, humiliated, terrified, and already dealing. Quick recap for anyone who skipped part 1. First of all, how dare you? A shop bought India. The shop then spent a decade insulting everyone in India, including its own army, which was 5/6 Indian and 100% done. One rumored pig and cow greased cartridge later, the Bengal army rose, took Delhi, dusted off an 82-year-old poet emperor, and by the summer of 1857, the mightiest corporation on earth was hiding inside its own forts. Which brings us to the reckoning. The Revolt of 1857. Part 2. The Reckoning. Now, the 4 cards played in order. Card 1. The Sea. Troop ships were converging on Calcutta from England, from Persia, from Burma. An entire army that was literally mid-ocean, on its way to fight a war in China, got a note and took a left turn to India instead. Card 2. The Punjab. Recently conquered, differently garrisoned, and deeply unenthusiastic about a Mughal restoration, the Punjab stayed with the company and sent men, money, and one very, very large siege train rolling south toward Delhi.
And the suspect regiments here in the Punjab?
Relieved of their muskets, sir, before breakfast. They are furious about it, quietly.
Card 3, the cruelest one. The rebels had 100 risings, 1 enemy, and no plan. Say the word with me now, one more time. Unplanned. And card 4, the wire. You already watched it get played. The company, on the other hand, had no principles and excellent logistics. In a short war, principles matter. In a long war, logistics wins. This was about to become a very long war. First stop of the reckoning, Cawnpore. General Havelock's column marched out of Allahabad in July, through the killing midsummer heat, where the sun dropped almost as many men as the fighting did, and won battle after battle at a pace nobody thought possible. Nana Sahib's army broke. And Nana himself? Vanished. The company put a bounty on his head that could buy a palace, chased rumors of him for decades, and never found him. The man collects his grievance in part 1, loses his war in part 2, and simply exits history. And then the column reached Cawnpore and found the BB car. They were 2 days too late. Everything we said in part 1 stands. We don't do jokes here, and we won't start now. What the British did next is the part their own textbooks used to skip. And some of it had already started before the BB car. Colonel Neil's men had been answering rebellion with massacre since June. Villages burned along the line of march. Mass hangings, 100 and more from a single roadside tree, many of them men who had nothing to do with the BB car at all. Captured rebels were strapped across the mouths of cannon and executed, a punishment chosen precisely because it was public, and because it denied a man his funeral rites. Hindu or Muslim, it's in the company's own records, down to the counts. We will not show it. We will not skip it either. If you came into this story hoping to keep a tidy moral scoreboard, throw it away. From the summer of 1857 onward, there are no clean hands within 100 miles of Cawnpore. Cawnpore was retaken, which left the biggest prize on the board, the city where the rebellion had crowned its emperor. Delhi. Rebel garrison, tens of thousands, with more arriving every week. And camped on a rocky ridge outside the walls, the British besieging force, a few thousand sunburnt men. A siege so undersized that historians genuinely argue about who was besieging whom.
Sir, the city we are besieging has attacked us. Again, we are now defending our own siege.
Perhaps if we stopped calling it a siege, sir, it would stop being embarrassing.
This went on for 3 months. Heatstroke, cholera, daily rebel sorties. The ridge wasn't so much a siege as a very angry campsite that refused to leave. Inside the walls, things were also not going great. Remember Bakht Khan and his budget? Well, an emperor with no treasury, rival sepoy factions, and one extremely expensive war makes for board meetings almost as dysfunctional as the companies.
I did warn you. No troops, no magazine, no treasury. I ask again. Did anyone at any point write a plan down? Anyone? A pamphlet even?
The plan is hold Delhi.
Bold. Visionary. And the budget you promised me?
The plan is hold Delhi.
Then, as the summer ended, the angry campsite received 2 deliveries. Delivery 1, John Nicholson. How do I explain John Nicholson? 34 years old, 6'2", permanently furious. So terrifying that, the Victorians swore this was true, a religious sect formed to worship him. He had its members flogged. They worshipped him harder. His letters proposed punishments for rebels that I am not going to read on this platform. He was exactly as cruel as he was brave. Both are about to matter. Delivery 2, the great siege train from the Punjab. Miles of heavy guns hauled by elephants. The angry campsite suddenly had artillery. In the second week of September, the batteries opened. Within days, there were holes in the walls of Delhi. 3 a.m., September the 14th. 4 columns crept toward the breaches, and most of that assault force was Indian. Sikh, Punjabi, Gurkha, fighting for the British. 1857 was never Britain versus India. It's a corporation versus its own army, and everyone else choosing sides. At the Kashmir Gate, a small party of engineers walked up to the front door of a defended city, in full view of the walls, carrying bags of gunpowder, and knocked. Half of them were shot down, laying the charges. The survivors lit the fuse anyway. The gate came down, the columns went in, and John Nicholson, first man through, exactly as advertised, was shot through the chest within hours. Delhi did not fall in a day. It fell in a week. Street by street, house by house. The worst kind of fighting there is. The emperor slipped out of the Red Fort, and on September the 21st, the capital of the rebellion was British again. The army sacked the city. The surviving population, all of it, was driven out to camp in the countryside for months. Mansions looted. Prisoners shot in batches. One of the city's great poets survived in the ruins and wrote, simply, that his Delhi was gone. Nicholson lingered 9 days and died just after the city fell. 34. The Victorians built statues of him. Brave, brilliant, merciless. That's the only statue history owes anybody. Zafar had fled 6 miles south, of all the places on earth, to the tomb of Humayun, his own ancestor. The dynasty's story had run through that man 300 years earlier. Now its last emperor sat in the cold of the crypt, waiting to find out how the story ends. Enter Major William Hodson, cavalry commander, brilliant swordsman, cold as a ledger, and about as sentimental. He rode out with a handful of horsemen to arrest the Emperor of Hindustan.
Surrender, and your life is guaranteed. That is the offer. It does not improve.
Zafar took the promise. And, to be exact about it, Hodson kept it. Zafar would live. The princes were never offered the same deal. The next day, Hodson arrested 3 of them, 2 of Zafar's sons and a grandson. On the road back to the city, at a gate the city still calls the Khuni Darwaza, the Bloody Gate, he stopped the cart and shot them. His own authority. No trial, no orders. The empire never punished him for it. Parts of it quietly applauded. Hold that thought. The next time anyone tells you this story has heroes on either payroll, it doesn't. It has people and a machine. As for Zafar, the company put him on trial. For, and I need you to fully appreciate this, assuming the sovereignty of Hindustan. They tried the Emperor of India for claiming to be the Emperor of India in his own throne room.
You are charged with assuming the sovereignty of Hindustan.
Young man, I did not assume it. I inherited it. You are renting.
Verdict: guilty. The court did work for the prosecution after all. Sentence: exile. In October 1858, the last Mughal emperor left Delhi in a bullock cart, under guard, bound for Rangoon in Burma. He lived 4 more years in a small house that was not a palace. The story goes he was forbidden pen and paper, the British afraid to the very end of what a poet might write, and scratched his last verses onto the walls with charcoal. He died in November 1862, and they buried him the same afternoon in a grave they left deliberately unmarked, so that it could never become a shrine. 500 years of the house of Timur. Babur, Akbar, Shah Jahan and his Taj. All of it ended in a Rangoon backyard. He was 87. He never did get back to his rhyming problem. Meanwhile, Lucknow, where we left a few thousand defenders, nearly half of them loyal Indian sepoys, remember? Holed up in the residency with the Begum's army outside the walls. In September, a relief force finally punched its way in, at terrible cost, and then discovered it was not big enough to punch back out. Congratulations, gentlemen, you have successfully reinforced the trap. The rescue was now also besieged. So Britain sent for the adult in the room, Sir Colin Campbell, 64 years old, in every war since Napoleon, and famously, gloriously cautious. Rival generals sneered that he moved like a crawling camel. He did not care. His men came home alive.
We will do this properly, or we will not do it at all.
In November, Campbell's force fought its way in. At a walled garden called the Secundra Bagh, the fighting was so savage that 24 Victoria Crosses were awarded for a single day, the most ever. Around 2,000 rebels died inside those walls, and no prisoners were taken. Both halves of that sentence are the point. 2 days later, Campbell looked at the map and did the most Campbell thing imaginable. He said no, and smuggled the entire garrison, soldiers, civilians, women, children, the lot, out through the lines in the dead of night. Legend has it, with the campfires left burning to fool the sentries. The greatest rescue of the war was, technically, a retreat. His men came home alive. The Begum held Lucknow all winter, a rebel capital with a boy king on the throne. In March, Campbell came back with one of the largest armies Britain had ever assembled in India, Nepal's Gurkhas alongside, and took the city for good. Begum Hazrat Mahal did not surrender. She fought on for another year, and when it was over, she refused every British offer. The pension, the title, the pardon. Published her own proclamation, point by point, telling India exactly why the Queen's promises shouldn't be trusted, and crossed into Nepal with her son. She died in Kathmandu 20 years later, unbought to the last. By the spring of 1858, the company had its cities back. The countryside was another matter. Because the countryside kept producing commanders like these: Kunwar Singh of Jagdishpur, a Rajput landholder from Bihar, ruined by company debt collectors, who took the field at the age of nearly 80. 80! At an age when most men battle nothing more dangerous than stairs, he ran rings around British columns for a solid year.
80, child. What exactly do they threaten me with? A short life?
Crossing the Ganga under pursuit, he was shot in the arm. Legend says he drew his sword, cut the arm off, and gave it to the river. Embellished? Almost certainly. But days later, still carrying that wound, the old man beat a British force in open battle and took his hometown back. 3 days after his victory, the wound killed him, at home in Jagdishpur, undefeated. Maulvi Ahmadullah Shah of Faizabad, preacher, strategist, and by his enemies' own account, one of the best soldiers the rebellion had. He'd helped rout the British at Chinhut back in Part 1's summer. In the field, they never took him. He was killed in June 1858, not by an army, by the men of a local Raja at the Raja's own gate for a British bounty reported at 50,000 rupees. Where force had failed, the checkbook worked. Remember that sentence. The next 90 years of empire are in it. A Hindu zamindar of 80, a Muslim Maulvi, a Begum ruling Lucknow, a Rani arming Jhansi. This rebellion had no plan, no headquarters, and no flag. But look at that caste list and tell me the one thing it agreed on. The shop had made an enemy of absolutely everyone. Which brings us to Central India and the campaign everybody remembers. In January 1858, the company unleashed its best general of the whole war, Major General Hugh Rose. Target: the great rebel stronghold of Central India, Jhansi. Rose was dapper, precise, allergic to failure, and, this is documented, perpetually dying in the heat. He fought half this campaign being fanned by aids, occasionally fainting clean off his feet, and never once losing. India's climate came closer to beating him than any army did. Waiting for him at Jhansi, Rani Lakshmibai, the widow the company had robbed with a stamp. In part 1, whatever the legend added later, the record says this much on its own. She ruled the city, she armed it, she trained with her troops, and when the company's army arrived, she did not hand over the keys.
5 years I petitioned, in writing, in their own courts, with their own lawyers. Consider this, my final submission.
On April the 3rd, after 2 weeks of siege, Rose stormed the walls. The sack of Jhansi was merciless. Thousands died in the city. That is simply what this war was. Everywhere it touched. But the Rani was not among the dead. That night, she was gone. Out through the siege lines on horseback, her adopted son tied at her back, hundreds of riders around her. That part, remarkably, is documented. The 100 miles in one night version? That's the poem talking. She reached Kalpi. Kalpi fell in May. And now the rebels were out of fortresses, out of treasure, and very nearly out of war. So Tatya Tope and the Rani did the single most audacious thing anyone attempted in 18 months of rebellion. They stole an army. The Maharaja of Gwalior had stayed loyal to the British. His army had opinions about that. When the rebels marched up, the Maharaja's own army switched sides, at parade, essentially en masse. The Maharaja fled to the British, and the rebels walked into the greatest fortress in India, treasury included, almost without a fight. The rebellion, which had been dying on its feet, now owned the strongest fortress on the subcontinent. Word was sent to headquarters.
Sir, the rebels appear to have acquired Gwalior.
Acquired.
The garrison defected at parade, sir, treasury included. The Maharaja is here, actually, in the lobby.
It lasted 17 days. Rose, half dead in the June heat, moving faster than anyone believed he could, arrived before the rebels had even finished arguing about command. There's our word again, at the worst possible moment. Unplanned. In the fighting outside Gwalior in mid-June 1858, Rani Lakshmibai was killed. She died fighting, in the field with her troops. Every account agrees on that much. The details, the uniform, the horse, the sword in her hand, no two reliable accounts agree on, so we won't invent them. She was about 30 years old. Even her birth year, historians argue about. That's how young this legend was. Even Hugh Rose, in his official dispatch, is famously reported to have called her the best and bravest military leader the rebels had. The icon came later, the paintings, the statues, the Khoob Ladi Mardani, which is a poem from 1930, as we told you in part 1. But strip every last ounce of legend away, and what remains is still this. The company robbed a widow with a stamp, and collecting on that stamp took their finest general, 2 armies, and a year. Gwalior fell days later, and with it, the war, as a war, was over. Nobody told Tatya Tope. For the next 10 months, Nana Sahib's old general ran the most infuriating guerrilla campaign in the company's 2.5-century history. Across central India, across Rajputana, over rivers in flood. He crossed the Narmada going south when every British column was certain he'd go north. The company assigned, and this is real, multiple converging columns under multiple generals to catch one man. For the better part of a year, the maps in Calcutta looked like a committee trying to catch a housefly. It ended the only way it was ever going to end. Not in battle, in betrayal. In April 1859, a Raja he trusted sold his sleeping camp to the company. Tatya Tope was taken in the Paron forest, tried in days, and hanged at Shivpuri. By the accounts of the men who watched, he walked to the scaffold unassisted and unafraid, and even the British officers present wrote about him afterwards with something dangerously close to respect. With him ended the last campaign of the revolt. So, 18 months. The greatest armed challenge the British Empire faced in the entire 19th century. And it failed. Why? You know the cards. The sea brought endless reinforcements. The Punjab held. The wire beat the horse every single place it mattered. The British would later carve it in stone in Delhi. The electric telegraph has saved India. Their words, on an actual monument, to a cable. But the 5th reason is the one that decided it. 100 risings never became one war. Delhi fought for the Mughals, Awadh fought for its Nawab, Jhansi for its Rani, the talukdars for their land, the sepoys for their faith and their pay. Everyone fought the shop. Nobody fought it together. No shared plan, no shared command, no shared tomorrow. Unplanned. And one more number before the ending. Most of India never rose at all. The Bombay army held. The Madras army held. Bengal proper, the south, most of the Punjab. Quiet. This was a rebellion of the North Central Plain. Massive, genuine, and nowhere near universal. Hold on to both of those words, because both built what came next. Because someone had to pay for all this. And for once in this entire story, the bill landed on the correct desk. London had watched 18 months of catastrophe and arrived at a conclusion roughly 250 years overdue. Perhaps a private company with shareholders should not own a subcontinent containing 1/5 of the human race.
With respect, we have had one bad year.
One bad year. Sir, the army mutinied. We lost Delhi. The treasury is a crater and parliament is outside with a bill.
The Government of India Act, 1858. Every territory, every treaty, every soldier, every last rupee, transferred from the East India Company to the British Crown. The shop that bought India was itself wound up, repossessed, nationalized, gone.
We shall take it from here.
Pay for the pepper.
And the taxes stay with us.
And here's the detail that tells you everything about 1858. The shareholders were fine. Dividends guaranteed by the Indian taxpayer naturally, while the company was gently wound down over years. The corporation died, the portfolio survived. Some things are eternal. On November the 1st, 1858, at Allahabad, Governor-General Canning read out Queen Victoria's proclamation to the princes, chiefs, and people of India. Canning, by the way, was nicknamed Clemency Canning as an insult because he kept trying to hang fewer people. Sit with that workplace culture for a second.
Her Majesty proclaims, the religions of India shall not be interfered with. The treaties of the princes shall be scrupulously maintained, and amnesty, full pardon, to all in arms, save those who took part in murder.
And in the years right after, Canning toured India, handing the princes sealed guarantees of the one thing the company had spent 30 years denying, with a rubber stamp.
Say it. Say it.
Adopted son counts.
The doctrine of lapse was dead, repealed by the very empire that invented it, the instant it stopped being profitable and started being flammable. Canning even said the quiet part out loud, calling the princes breakwaters in the storm. Translation: never again let there be nobody left who'd defend the system. It worked for 90 years. Oh, and the talukdars of Awadh, the landlords the company had spent 2 years dispossessing, restored, all but a handful. The peasants the company had liberated had joined the revolt anyway, so the Raj simply rehired the old elite as local management. If you cannot beat them, make them the collaborator class. So what was this new Raj? In one word, suspicious. The army was rebuilt around a single design principle. 1857, never again. Far more British soldiers per Indian soldier. Artillery, British hands only. Recruitment quietly walked away from the regions that had risen, toward communities the British decided to label loyal. A policy later dressed up in a whole pseudo-scientific costume called martial races. Divide, recruit, repeat. Of the Bengal Army's 74 infantry regiments, 69 had rebelled or been disbanded. 69 of 74. The army that replaced it was designed not to win wars abroad, but to never again lose control at home. And something colder settled in that no Act of Parliament wrote down. Distance. After 1857, British India walled itself off. The clubs, the cantonments, the permanent wariness. The company had at least pretended India was a business partner. The Raj never pretended. It ruled a country it had decided it could not trust. And that decision, please note, ran both ways. So what do we call all this? The British called it the Sepoy Mutiny, which is like calling a house fire a toaster incident. Technically where it started, nowhere near what it became. In 1909, the nationalist Savarkar renamed it the First War of Indian Independence, which is a battle cry, not a measurement. It wasn't one war. It wasn't fought for India as a single idea, and half the subcontinent sat it out. The historian's version is less quotable and more true. Dozens of mutinies and rebellions, overlapping for many different reasons, against one common enemy. Call it what you like, genuinely, both names are yours to use. But know why each name exists and what each one is trying to make you feel. That's the real history lesson, and it's free. Here's what nobody disputes. It was the greatest revolt the British Empire ever faced. It killed the biggest corporation in history, and it taught a generation of Indians something the company never meant to teach, that the whole thing could be shaken. 90 years later, India pushed the British into the sea after all, with marches and salt and paperwork of its own this time. Which, given everything you've just watched, was probably the point. But that is another video. The final scoreboard. The East India Company dissolved. Zafar, an unmarked grave in Rangoon, and 500 years of the House of Timur ended. The Rani, the Begum, Kunwar Singh, the Maulvi, Tatya Tope, legends, with the paperwork to earn it. Nana Sahib, never found. And India, one crown colony held with one long, suspicious memory, and a clock it couldn't hear ticking.
And the chapatis?
18 months of inquiries, files, and increasingly baffled memos, and the company went to its grave never knowing. Which means, technically, the bread outlasted the empire.